Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic to help us have more meaningful conversations with ourselves and with each other. I'm your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and I'm so excited to bring on our guest, Dr. Jessie Everts. It's my first time getting to formally introduce you, and you'll all
Yeah.
understand here in a minute about our history. But let me tell you a little bit about Jessie and the conversation we'll be exploring. So Jessie Everts is a PhD in LMFT. She's a therapist, mom, yoga mindfulness teacher, author, and mental health consultant. She uses mindfulness practices in her work, in her parenting, and in her life. She is the author of 2 books, Brave New Mom, a survival guide for mindfully navigating postpartum motherhood, and Connecting with Loneliness, a guided journal. She is passionate about bringing mental health knowledge and skills to people outside of the therapy office and helping people feel more self-compassionate and connected. She lives in Minnesota with her spouse and 2 strong-willed children. Welcome to the show, Jessie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
What else would you like people to know about you?
Oh my gosh. Well, those are the big things, but that I wrote Brave New Mom, which I'll show because I think it's beautiful. I didn't design this, but I think it's amazing.
Such a beautiful book.
It is beautiful. But I wrote it during COVID. So I wrote it in the early days of COVID when we were really my kids were here. I was doing full-time childcare and working, and like so many other families, just trying to make things work. And so the experience that I talk about in the book is of new mom survival mode was happening all over again with my kids, in 2020. So I can really relate to all the parents who have had a hard time and are trying to figure out still how to make, parenting and working and worrying about health all work at the same time. So
right. Just
yeah.
Existing. I feel like in this
Yeah.
world. Just a quick fun side note for those of you who are listening. We go way back, but we haven't seen each other or talked to each other in a while. We were in high school together. You were a few years
Yes.
ahead of me, and we ran in the same circles and did a lot of theater together. And so this is it's a little bit of a reunion for us. So
It is so
if you hear,
exciting.
they'll hear my, the smile in my voice, as I'm talking. I know I'm in, and we've been connected and following each other on social media for a number of years now. And, one of the things that I don't want to say excited, but I think is really important is for us to explore and talk about, how do we better understand for ourselves if people are going through it, but also for those around us, specifically spending some time on postpartum depression. Now, for those of you who might be listening going, well, I don't have children, I don't know that I'm ever going to have children, before you stop, before you turn off, the reality is you will know people who have children. You will be working with people. You might be leading people. And, and I think that it still feels like something that a lot of people, this goes to some all kind of mental health, depending on the culture you're brought up in, depending on your organization, your just your family dynamics, that it can be really scary to say I'm struggling and I need help. And then it can be really hard for people to know how to show up. So today is about how do we explore showing up for yourself and for other people. Take me back a little bit. Selfishly, I'm curious to know about your journey, but just so, summarize, what's been your journey? When did you know that this was the field you want to get into? And then when did it become clear that you wanted to really focus, both in your writings and in your work on focusing on parenting?
Yeah. Well, I way back just knew I wanted to be a therapist. I kind of from college on, that was I didn't know what kind of therapist, and there are lots of different kinds of therapists, and we can get into that too. But because I think it's part of breaking down the stigma of going to seek therapy is that there's all kinds of therapists out there who do all different kinds of things. So I decided I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist because at the time I wanted to work with kids, and I did school-based mental health for quite a long time, where I was kind of officed in the school and working with kids who are at high risk or having mental health struggles. But so much seeing that I needed to also work with parents, that
Mm,
you can very rarely work with a kid without working with the parents, and make any kind of meaningful change. So I did start working with kind of whole families, and around that same time, was in a nonprofit job where working with women with addiction and their kids, kind of in a treatment setting, is when I had my kids. 3 years apart, but both working in this kind of bigger company. And just I mean, I was fairly well resourced and worked in an all women's agency, but yet had all kinds of struggles trying to figure out like
mm,
who am I now after I have kids, and trying to fit that person into the back into the workplace, and feeling all kinds of guilt that I couldn't be productive at the levels that I used to be before I had kids, that I couldn't stay past 6 o'clock, or that I couldn't, when my kids were sick, I had to take time off, and all the way down to the minutia, as I know others have struggled with things about pumping at work and trying to talk about, you know, maternal leave, but also paternal leave and things like that in my organization, that really started to steer me toward, wow, there's a lot to do with perinatal mental health, is what we call it
mm.
in the mental health world, because that encompasses both pregnancy all the way through postpartum. And they'll say that postpartum is 2 years after you have a baby, but any time after you have a baby, you are postpartum. So from my kids are a little older now, but I'm still postpartum. And so I think that, just paying attention to more of the emotional health. Even when I had my kids 6 and 9 years ago, it was a different world, and we weren't talking a
Mm,
lot about postpartum depression. Was just starting to be on the radar, but all kinds of other postpartum issues were not. And so I think that it's just felt like such a need out there. And also, yeah, to sort of take it to the next level of workplaces, and what can somebody who's in charge of a workplace do to support parents, both the birthing parent and a non-birthing parent, a partner of someone who's had a baby. I think it's
yeah.
really important. Hmm.
I mean, like, I'm not surprised, but when I think about, because I don't know, patriarchy and all that fun stuff, but,
Hmm.
I mean, something that is so natural and something that's so common, um, is still so, like, not talked about or normalized
Hmm.
in a way where, that was something we heard when we reached out for people to send in questions or to share their stories, was just, I just felt like I couldn't ask for help, or I didn't know how to bring it up, or I didn't know how to bring it up with my birthing partner, who maybe I noticed some
Hmm.
signs. And it's, and it just, it
Yeah.
always makes me really sad when this is, I mean, this is, such a normal, natural process. And these are
Mhm.
normal, natural feelings and experiences. And yet we'll just, keep them in the shadows a bit, or talk about them intellectually, right? Like,
Mhm. Right.
without getting into the nuance of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we can't do that anymore. I mean, I think that maybe one of the things the pandemic showed is that, like, if if those two major roles in your life, being a parent and being a worker, are in conflict, and there's not room for both, the one that goes is the workplace, because the other one
Mm,
can't go,
mhm.
And I think,
Right.
gosh, I read somewhere that something like 7 million workers had to leave work during the pandemic to provide childcare to parent their kids, mostly women, but not all. And so I think that, yeah, we can't just assume that, like, well, parenting just happens in your home and you don't need to talk about it anywhere else, or it doesn't affect you anywhere else, because that's not true. It definitely contributed to this great resignation that we've seen over the past few years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 100%, because people have gotten really clear about what's important to them. And the thing is, honoring people's whole experience has always
Hmm.
been important. It just hasn't always been valued,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And for people who are listening, who are, who maybe listen to the show specifically to get thoughts on, like, how to support their team members more effectively, or the people that they support, um, that that role doesn't stop at the door.
Mm.
I mean, and I think that that's always been something that I want to continue to push, is I don't leave my personal self at the door. I can't, maybe I can compartmentalize it in the short term, but it's still with me. And
Mm.
and I know something that we're seeing quite a bit, um is, especially in light of the recent Roe versus Wade ruling, is that particularly in the US, a lot of women, I mean, we have a number of clients who are currently pregnant and who are just really heavy. They feel really
Mhm.
heavy and worried, and that impacts them personally. It also impacts them
Mhm.
professionally. And how do we just learn more so we can, I always say, like, when we can see differently, we can do differently. And
Mhm.
that's part of why
Yeah.
we're here today.
Yeah, I think anybody who is in their childbearing years or yet to come to their childbearing years, this is on their minds, right? This past few weeks of sort of, do I have control or charge or choice in whether or when I expand my family, or whether or when I need to take leave from work, or whether or when, if I have a medical complication, or I need to terminate a pregnancy for whatever reason, if that's going to be okay. And lots of workplaces that I consult in too, having these major conversations about how do we support our employees, regardless of where they live, or where they work, to maintain that choice, which I think is a great conversation to have. Especially, I'm seeing lots of male-led organizations have that discussion, and in a really supportive way of, this is not for us to decide, it's for us to support. So I
Yeah.
think that's
Mm.
it's wonderful, and also, yeah, scary and terrifying
Yeah.
for lots of people that I've worked with who are in that perinatal period. And I mean, working with women who have had to terminate pregnancies for all kinds of reasons, wanted pregnancies that they couldn't carry through to term for whatever reason, or even those who just have not wanted to carry a pregnancy to term, that this is, across the board, a hard thing to yeah, make fit with this idea of how your life is going to go.
Yeah, yeah. It was, we were actually talking with some clients up in Canada, and my colleague and I, we were remarking on, those are the first women we talked to this week that felt light,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're not impacted by this. Hopefully they won't be, or yet.
Yeah.
And so that
Yeah.
was just something we noticed. But so,
Mhm.
so let's dig in a little bit more. I mean, I want to spend as much time as we can, and our conversation will go where it needs to go. But specifically talking about postpartum depression and all of that goes along with it. I think that, again, it's sometimes there are these experiences, or that we're familiar with the names of them. So I
Mhm.
mean, full disclosure to the audience, many of you know this, but I don't have children. I'm child free by choice. I am a very involved aunt. We're we support the little ones in our lives differently. And even for me, though, again, I have lots of sisters and sister-in-laws and friends that have gone through this, who have experienced it and have seen firsthand how hard it can be. When everything in the movies tells you, oh, as soon as that baby comes out, like, you're just you're going to bond with it immediately. It's going to be the,
Mhm.
like, perfect birthing experience. And all of them have said fairly explicitly it's the hardest thing they've ever done. Like,
Mhm.
period.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, go ahead. What I didn't mean to
Well,
interrupt
yeah,
you.
I think there has been, and I think we're coming away from it, but it's slow to leave this myth of, yeah, how both pregnancy, birth, and the early years of being a parent are supposed to go, that are idyllic, and you're supposed to enjoy all of it, and you're supposed to love it, and it won't be difficult, and you'll just know what to do, and all of that is a myth. All of
Yeah.
that's a myth. And for a lot of women, they don't. I mean, for a lot of birthing people, and I'll try to say birthing people
Mm,
because not everybody who is pregnant or has a baby
mm.
identifies as a woman. But yeah, not everybody enjoys pregnancy. Not everybody has a good birth experience. There's something like 34% of births are traumatic births. So
Mm.
something goes wrong, or something has to be done differently than you expected in the birth situation. And then the early months and year after are, yeah, you don't know how you're going to feel, and you don't know kind of what to expect. And so us putting an expectation of, well, it should just all go fine. You should just know what to do, and if you don't, then there's probably something wrong with you, is the other piece that parents take on. Then is,
Sure.
if I'm struggling, then that must mean there's something wrong with me, not that this is a really hard thing that everybody goes through.
Right, right. We were just, my colleague Teresa and I, we were talking with a client who, is pregnant and just navigating all of this. And she said, "Oh, I just know when she comes, I'll be, like I'll be bonded, I'll be whatever." And she made some comment, and Teresa, who has three children, who are now range in age from 8 to 12, she goes, "And you also might not feel that right away.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's also normal and okay."
Mhm.
And, it gave the person a little bit of a pause of, "Oh, right."
Yeah. Mhm.
So let's talk about, help us understand, speaking to somebody who hasn't experienced this, help us unpack and understand postpartum depression.
Mhm.
What does it look like? And we'll just start there. We'll just keep it
Mhm.
more open-ended.
Sure, yeah. And we, again, in the mental health field, call it perinatal mood and
Sure,
anxiety
thank you.
disorders because it can start during pregnancy. It's likely you can have, and depression is maybe the most known, but postpartum anxiety is also probably as prevalent. We just don't
Mm,
talk about it as much yet. But so we call it perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. That kind of encapsulates anything that can, mental health wise, come up during pregnancy and postpartum. Um, but I think that it's you know different from any other period of your life in which your hormones are all over the place because you're growing a baby and then having a baby and then your hormones crash back down to like re-regulating themselves. So for everybody there's a period after you have a baby, called the baby blues, that happens just because of that hormone shift, right?
mm,
Like just because the hormones are trying to re-regulate after you have a baby, almost everybody experiences some mood changes in those first couple weeks after you have a baby just because of that kind of your body's just trying to figure out what to do here. So most people do feel either depressed or sad, or for me, it was really intense emotions, like high highs and low
mm.
lows in those first couple weeks. I'd be crying for no reason at all. And my husband would ask, like, what's going on? And I would say, I don't know. I'm so either so happy or so sad. I don't really know. Like it all just feels kind of mixed up and jumbled. So that period of kind of readjustment after birth is so normal and something most people go through. But when it is longer than about 2 weeks is when we might start to think of it as postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. If there's kind of symptoms that persist, or if they're really severe, if people are having suicidal thoughts or things like that, that we don't want to ignore, even in those first couple weeks, but kind of. And so I like the idea of sort of opening the conversation during pregnancy, even if there's a partner or a support person, to just check in daily almost and say, how are you feeling, and really kind of tune into the answer so that both the person who's pregnant and a partner or support person can kind of help track and sort of see, like, is this feel like normal mood fluctuations that we all have? Some days are not so great and some days are better. Or is it persisting for a long period of time? Is it over 2 weeks that we've been checking in and every day you feel pretty low and sad and
Mm,
no
mm,
energy? But the other part that is complicated is that after you have a baby, you're not sleeping well.
right.
And sleep affects every part of mental health. I mean, you can't, it's very hard to feel good when you're not sleeping regularly. And so knowing that, you're probably also not necessarily paying attention to some of your own bodily needs, like
Mm,
nutrition, and you're not able to exercise or do physical movement for a while after birth. And you're just so focused on this baby and keeping this baby alive. For a lot of people, it's sort of like your own self care goes to the wayside. So that's, I mean, a part to sort of be prepared for and also to tune into is like, am I taking care of myself? Because it's really hard to get through anything difficult if I'm not. But that the sleep, especially, is sort of a new frontier for a lot of people who haven't had trouble with sleep before having a baby, that's really hard to work on your mood or feel better if you're not also figuring out how. And it's impossible to sleep like you did before you had a baby, but if
sure.
partners can or support people can help, at least make sure you're getting a chunk of sleep that's long enough to go through a full REM cycle is really kind of the guideline we talk about, is like everybody needs a 2 to 3 hour chunk of sleep to even be able to kind of function and get through the day. So figuring out together how that can happen, how responsibilities can be shared so that sleep is at least less likely to impact the mental health than anything else. But yeah, that beyond a few weeks and with intense symptoms, things like low mood, lack of interest in activities that you used to like, feeling maybe really fatigued beyond the point of beyond what we would normally expect a new parent to feel with lack of sleep. Those are signs of postpartum depression that probably needs some kind of intervention. It's
Mm.
unlikely that you just sort of get through that on your own. And people can, and people do certainly kind of just wait it out. But there is a lot of help available. And I hope that we're, by opening these conversations with partners and with support people, that the idea of going to therapy, even for a short period of time after you have a baby, is more and more accepted. And I think that it is,
Yeah.
and I hope that it is. But I think talking about that, like the possibility of that, even in pregnancy, is really helpful, because then by the time you're in that really vulnerable kind of period, it's less of a scary thing to say, like, why don't you go talk to somebody about this? Because if somebody has not considered that option at all and now is
Mm.
feeling really low and vulnerable and fatigued and tired and like it's never going to get better, that's a really hard time to convince somebody to go get help. So what I love, a trend that I love, is that I've seen a lot of pregnant people coming into therapy in the end of their pregnancy, just to sort of get to know a therapist, have
Mm.
somebody who knows your baseline, have somebody who knows you a little bit before you have the baby, and then just check in afterward, whether things are going great or not. Like, then you have a relationship with a therapist who can be there and be supportive when you need it, if you need it.
You've laid out a lot of really great information, and I wanna go back to some of the points you made,
Mhm.
because some of the most common questions that we received from, from people on social media in preparation for this, first was how many people experiencing it, and,
Mhm.
in hearing that reality of most people are going to experience something, just because that's just part of that hormonal regulation that happens, and hopefully people are talking to their doctor and are a little bit prepared for it. But I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that even when that's a possibility, or when that that's likely, it can still throw people off when they
Mhm.
maybe haven't experienced that.
Yeah.
The other thing of that was some of the questions that came up, was how can we be more proactive about it?
Mhm.
And I appreciate that idea of, if possible, right? And if you have the resources and the availability, to start building a relationship with a therapist, because I
Mhm.
know, on my own personal mental health journey, um, it it took me a little longer to go, maybe longer than I would want now, right? To go, oh, I think I need to see a therapist, and I would imagine. So I want to sort of check this observation that, when people are in the situation of taking care of this new child, that there's this other layer on it that's different than if I was just experiencing anxiety on my own or depression on my own, and that's like that guilt or that sense of failure. I mean, I've
Mhm.
heard that
Mhm.
from friends and family members of, not just what's wrong with me, but that I'm failing
Mhm.
because I am experiencing this. I am failing because I can't take care of this. And so what, in addition to being proactive about, educating yourself and maybe seeking out therapy, what are some other strategies? So if you are the new birthing parent, what are some other things that would be good practices, or even mindsets, or things for people to do, to prepare? Uh, and then we can talk about what are the coping and support strategies when they're in it.
Yeah. I think, and my book is very mindfulness based, because that has been something that's really been helpful for me, is that one of the kind of situations that most new parents experience is this feeling of being in survival mode, of like
Mm.
not being very present, but just sort of getting through all the things, checking the boxes. When did the baby last eat? Like all of those things. How much sleep did I get last night? Like getting through the day, which is a very not present feeling. You're just sort of, you might not take a full deep breath or drink a glass of water in that state. You're just kind of trying to get through it. So I have found mindfulness is what
Mm.
works best for me, to sort of take myself out of that for moments at a time, and maybe more and more as you kind of advance in your parenting journey and get better at kind of recognizing when you need to do that, and when you're, and that it's not possible all the time, but sometimes to sort of recognize, oh, I'm in my survival mode. I haven't, been taking care of myself right now, and I need to take a break to do that. But so I think part of mindfulness being recognizing what feelings, thoughts, emotions, sensations you're having without judgment, right? Like that's
Mm.
a skill that not everybody pays attention to or tries to develop. And I think that is really pivotal in all kinds of mental health cases, is recognizing like I'm having a feeling, whether that's something positive or something that I like to feel or not. And if it's an unpleasant feeling, that's not let's not judge it and say like I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Mm.
There's something wrong with me if I'm feeling this way. But just to say it's a feeling, and it's not. There's no moral failing that causes that feeling. It's a product of all the context around you and everything that's going on with you, and it's a signal to you to take care of something. Likely, if it's an unpleasant
Mm.
feeling, it's sort of a
Mm.
like let's slow down and figure out what I need in this moment, not a what's wrong with me kind of response. And I think that alone, just sort of taking a different stance toward your feelings and thoughts that are, to sort of not judge them, but to say like, okay, what is this telling me about myself? Makes it a lot easier then to see asking for help as not a weakness and not a failure, but just this is something I need some help with. This is just something that I can't figure out how to deal with myself,
I
which there's
I
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, and I don't think on this show that I've gone into, detail with my own experience with, in my situation, panic disorder. But mindfulness, I'm convinced, good therapy and mindfulness was the
Yeah.
thing that helped me the most,
Mhm.
because I would fall into these patterns. My therapist, would call it grasping. I would fall into these patterns of, or my friend Rachel Sheeran will call them the wishing pits. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish I
Yeah.
didn't have to experience this. I wish I could just feel like I did before. I wish that I didn't have to. Right. And every time I would grasp for this reality that wasn't there
Mhm.
anymore, it just made me feel worse and
Right.
didn't help me in that moment, and it didn't and with anyone who's had experience with either extreme anxiety or panic attacks, it's not fun.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's very unsettling,
Yeah.
and you're right. I mean, it really is a muscle, just like if
Mhm.
you are building physical muscles and you're doing
Yeah.
reps every single day. It is a practice that needs to be developed, and especially what I found is it has to well, not that it has to be, but I found that when I could develop it either in the quiet or calm moments, it made it easier for me to tap into when things were hard, when they felt out of control, when the waves were crashing. Um, and I say this and I realize that I've gotten away from my practice, and I can tell that that's impacted me. And
Mhm.
and so I really appreciate that instead of the default, or the thought of, oh, there's something wrong with me, or perhaps, like in my experience, like I wish I didn't have to deal with this,
Mhm.
to realize that it's a signal. And I love
Mhm.
that language, and I wrote that down, that it's a signal for you to know that there's something you need to take care of.
Mhm.
Is quite beautiful, and again, can imagine and appreciate that when you're so focused on child, and
Mhm.
so focused on, I've seen those first few weeks, few months, where it is literally just we just need to keep this thing alive,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
not thinking about yourself, or feeling guilty. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that mom's guilt is,
Mhm.
or the parent guilt is incredibly palpable. Sometimes, like,
Mhm.
people feel guilty. I find that sometimes when it comes up in conversations, whether it's with, in just conversations with clients or friends, it's almost like they feel guilty about the guilt. And
Yeah.
then it just becomes this,
Mhm.
spiral for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's guilt is just a feeling, just like anything else,
Mm,
just like, sadness or anger, or so it's not there's nothing wrong with feeling guilty. And I think we kind of have this idea that like I should never feel guilty. But again,
Mm.
shoulds are almost
Yeah.
never true. They're
Right.
probably always a signal that the expectations you're putting on yourself are from somewhere else and from not, something that's not helpful to you.
Okay, wait. I mean, you're rushing past that, but I mean, I know that there's a lot of people who are listening to this who should all over themselves, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
Yep.
so say that again. So shoulds are almost never true, and
Yep.
they're usually a sign. Finish that last part again.
Well, they're a sign again to pay attention to something, right? Like
Yeah.
that, okay, so I'm feeling guilty that I need some time to myself because I feel like I should love being a mom and want to do it all the time and want to be around my baby all the time, right? And so what that tells me is it's important for me. That's an important thing to me, is to know that I care about my baby, and but also that it's okay to need the time to myself, right? So the message in the guilt that says you should never need time to yourself because because loving your
Mm.
baby is like the opposite of that, right? Is So you can argue with that should, right? Like recognizing in a guilt feeling, there's probably a message of, is the should true? Probably not, right? Like, is that saying that I'm not a human, or like don't have the feelings that I have, or that there's something wrong with the feelings that I have? Instead, is there a different way to interpret it that's like, I love this baby, but I also need time to myself, and that's okay.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's and the land of complexity of multiple things
Mhm.
can be true. I
Yes.
can I can love you, and I can need space,
Hmm.
and I can feel, happiness that you're here, and sadness for how things have changed.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
that's something that, I'm gonna look at the list of questions that came up, because
Mhm.
a number of people talked about that. And, and one person even said, how do you not feel selfish as you transition to this new, exciting, difficult yet draining venture?
Yeah.
Um, is so powerful. One thing, I mean, there's a number of questions that I want to explore with you. So first, um, a number of people shared that their non-birthing parent partner
Mhm.
also had moments of experiencing stress. And
Mhm.
so talked so I this I don't know. I mean, I understand the stress, the lack of sleep, but I don't
Mhm.
know, if are there also hormonal changes because of the,
Mhm.
in the non-birthing parents, because of the changes of the things. So talk to us about, how does it, one,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously it's more than just, it
Mhm.
affects more than the birthing parent, but so talk to us about what that looks like, and what people can, just expect. And
Yeah. Mhm.
because again, sometimes we just think solely the person
Mhm.
who's the birthing parent.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, these like perinatal and mood and anxiety disorders affect about 1 in 5 birthing people, but also 1 in 10 partners, right? So,
Mm,
like
mm,
about half the amount, but still a significant amount of partners are going to have postpartum, what might be identified as postpartum depression. It's probably not going to be labeled that by a medical or mental health professional because you weren't the one that carried the baby, but depression or anxiety during that postpartum phase, which to me says there's the hormonal piece is one big thing for the birthing partner, but I think, there probably are some kind of like synchronous mirror neuron kind of like hormonal
that's what
changes
I
in the
was wondering
partner
about.
just from being
Mhm.
along that journey with them. But I think the other part is this like sort of existential change that happens after you have a baby and you become a parent, when that wasn't a role that you had before, and just sort of a whole different lifestyle and kind of yeah, way of thinking about yourself and way of thinking about yourself in the world. I think all of that can take a toll, and kind of feed into feelings both of depression, or sort of just not knowing where you fit, or what how this new role fits for you is sometimes what I think the depression might look like, or anxiety. And there truly are a lot of things to worry about with a new baby. So I think that often people who have postpartum anxiety, birthing people or partners, often feel like, well, I can't not feel nervous about these things. It's very justified, and I can't stop. It would be dangerous for me to not feel
Mm,
anxious about all of
mm,
these things. So I
mm,
think there's
mm.
a little added layer of stigma about postpartum anxiety, in that we sort of expect that we should be worried about all these things, and it would be, unsafe not to be. So I think people
Sure.
are even less likely to talk about that in terms of with their doctor or with their mental health professional, just because it's sort of like, well, of course I'm going to be worried. This baby is helpless and relying on me for life. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that that equally affects the partner, right?
Yeah. What,
Mhm.
yeah, actually, a friend of mine who recently had multiples, she shared
Mhm.
about how, her husband had a pretty significant sort of stress episode. I mean,
Yeah.
they've just in the last month brought them all home and they're navigating all of this. I'm sure I can only imagine what the fatigue is like.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm curious about is part of this came up from a question, but part of it is I'm making some connections to people in my life and right, like
Mhm.
things that I
Mhm.
observed, and now I'm looking at it differently just through our conversation. So I really appreciate this. But because you mentioned that basically anytime after you have a child,
Mhm.
right, you're in that postpartum stage. And I know that one person shared, um, Jillian shared, she said she experienced when she started to wean her child and
Mhm.
experience some of those hormonal shifts. And also, I think some of that relationship shifts of the
Yeah.
baby needing her in a different
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
But she made, and I wanted to quote her, it made me less likely to speak out loud or to seek help because I felt like my kids were too old for it to count.
Oh yeah. 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 That untrue, and hopefully the medical profession, I think the medical profession kind of plays into all of this because so much of checkups after you have a baby are all about the baby, right? Like they've kind of
Yeah.
contributed to the baby as the important piece there. And only now are we making some headway in OBGYNs asking at that first appointment postnatal, how are you feeling? And a little bit
Mm,
about your mood, and doing some check-in with parents about how they're feeling. But I think that yeah, so much then it becomes about your child, and then it becomes, as your child grows, I do think there's this idea of like, well, this can't be about that anymore.
mm,
But
mm.
it's still important to talk about and still important to address, and it honestly doesn't really matter to a mental health professional whether it's postpartum or just a period of depression, whenever that
Yeah.
is in your life, right? And you can maybe trust the mental health professional that we're going to tease that out and help you like figure out the pieces, and it very well might be related to birth or postpartum even 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
um, and so that's okay. It's okay to always, anytime in your life, but especially anytime after you have kids, I think reach out and say I'm struggling with some stuff and I don't know where it comes from or what it's related to, but yeah, that's part of the gig that we do as therapists, is to try to help figure that out. And another thing that happens after you have kids is all kinds of stuff from your own childhood or parenting, being parented experience comes back
Sure.
around, and it's like either things you haven't thought about for years and years, or things that you never really struggled with, but now you don't have a model for how to do it differently. I mean, so sort of if you experience parenting that's not the kind of parenting style you want to have, there's this sort of inadequacy of like, how do I don't know any other way, but I know that wasn't good. And so there's all kinds of like family of origin stuff that comes up after you have
Right.
babies and kids too.
I that's really fascinating and makes so much sense. And I could also I've just never obviously I haven't thought about it because that I haven't had that
Yeah.
experience, but I
Mhm.
could also imagine that could bring up some either processed or unprocessed trauma
Yeah. Hmm.
at the same time of,
Hmm.
of perhaps grieving what you didn't have,
Yeah.
or processing it. And so, how common is it? Because sometimes I've experienced where when it was a really hard first year or 2, right? Either because maybe the baby was colicky or there was other
Mhm.
health challenges, um, that, just, I'm just speaking anecdotally as an observation, is that you can see I feel like I can observe sometimes the long-term effects or ripple of that.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious to know just, what is that? I don't even know what my question is, but just, um, if somebody goes through, say, an intense period,
Mhm.
whether that's, trauma from the birthing experience, whether that's experiencing, intense postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, what does that look like? Because again, I think, I mean, it goes back to this point of there's not a time frame. It's not like,
Right.
oh, your kid's 6 months,
You're
suck it
good.
up, you're good. Like this is it.
Right.
Because I mean, I see patterns in some people that I know and
Mhm.
love, that it's like it's still there. It's still
Yeah.
lingering, and something that they, still need to continue to navigate and be really intentional about.
Mhm. Yeah, you said the word grieving, and I think that is probably I think everybody in parenthood grieves something, right?
Mm,
I sort of either that like person that you used to be before you had kids to worry about and then had this other layer of responsibility. I think that's a really common experience to sort of experience that kind of grief at different times, right? Like sort of at periods throughout when your kids are growing up. So not just postpartum, but throughout and other kinds of grief too about, yeah, that sort of a memory that comes up when your child is the same age as you were when something
mm,
happened, right? That so we're kind of always experiencing waves of grief in parenthood as in life. I think as we're sort of recognizing what what may have happened to us that we didn't necessarily see as harmful in the moment, but left
right.
some lasting impacts. But yeah, I think that that's a really common experience. And right, that doesn't come up all in the first year. You sort of don't know when it's going to come up or when it's going to be important to talk about.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I mean, I can see that as I see, I lovingly call them my nibblings, but my nieces and
Mhm.
nephews, hitting different milestones too,
Yeah.
right? And what that brings up either from my sisters or my in-laws, and
Mhm.
navigating that, or family or friends, who have children who are going through that. One of the things that I want to make sure we give space to is how can those of us, you know, maybe we can tease this out of those of us who might have more intimate, close relationships with
Mhm.
parents, versus those of us who may not be as intimate, but maybe we work together, we're colleagues, maybe
Mhm.
we're somebody's manager or boss. Um, what are the ways in which we can support them? And I'm curious to look at that sort of through the like. So I'm going to go down further. So just follow my train of thinking.
Yeah.
If we are observing
Mhm.
changes in behavior, changes in emotions that maybe they aren't comfortable like acknowledging, maybe they aren't acknowledging, what are the best
Mhm.
ways to support somebody that you might have an inkling? I
Mhm.
think that this is more than just the 2-week baby blues. What are some
Mhm.
strategies we can use?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, first is not being scared to ask the question, "How are you feeling?"
Mhm.
and letting there be a real answer, right? And sort of wading through the, "Oh, I'm fine," or "Everything is good," right? Like, and sort of saying, "Well, yeah, how are you? I know it's a really hard time, and lots is going on after you have a baby." And so, like, opening the door for there to be more is
Mm,
probably the
mm,
most important thing, right?
mm.
Because
I love that language.
the person who's struggling with something is looking for cues from the person asking, yeah, are you really okay with my real answer or not, right? And we are very tuned into that in other people is like, do they want the perfunctory, like, yep, I'm good, let's get on with our meeting kind of thing, or are they really asking, are they really interested and open to the answer? And I think for the person asking, the worry in asking that is often like, well, I won't know what to do with the answer, right?
Right,
Like, well, what if
right,
they say they're
right.
really struggling? Then what? Like, so relieving for yourself some, and this is with all mental health, you don't have to fix it, right? Like asking about it and
Mhm.
caring about it does not mean that it's yours to fix or to solve, and that person knows that, and that person's not asking you to do that. So opening the door for somebody to give a real answer to that question is just that, right? And just that alone is valuable to sort of be a person that people know you can give a real answer to and say a little bit about what you're feeling, right? Because
Ah,
just that, and especially in the postpartum period, but always, I think just knowing that who you can talk to about things relieves so much of the pressure and that idea of there's something wrong with me that that alone is therapeutic, is valuable to be able to say to somebody, I'm struggling with sleep, or like, just let me vent a little bit about, like, yeah, we're having trouble feeding the baby, and so yeah, it's been stressful. That being able to say that to somebody is helpful.
yeah. There, I really love all of that, and, you know, as a mental health advocate myself who is often working with leaders from a standpoint of how can they be more emotionally supportive.
Yeah.
But not just leaders. I mean, that was part of my experience was, the two big things I learned is one, I didn't know how to take care of my mental health, and other people didn't know how to support me.
Mhm.
They didn't know how to support me as well, even though maybe they had really good intentions.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
um, that language of, how can we open the door for more? And I really appreciated when you said people are looking for cues that I can share the real answer.
Mhm.
And this is and I think that so many people, again, what I experience in my own world, would never imagine that they would be somebody who somebody couldn't be safe with. And yet,
Yeah.
right, there's lots of things we do, whether we
Mhm.
unintentionally dismiss, whether we, jump to the hyper positivity or the toxic
Yeah.
positivity.
Mhm.
It's and the thing that's coming up for me is in our work, um, we do a lot around immunity to change, which sort of invites us to look at what are we doing or not doing that's getting in the way.
Mhm.
And so for people who are listening, who are going, oh no, 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 I'm somebody they can be real with. I would lovingly invite you to go that when is that true and when is it not,
Mhm.
and what could you maybe do more of.
Mhm.
Um, and also that point of, because this is something we hear from people a lot, like, I'm not their therapist, Sarah. I'm not
Mhm.
that, I'll hear this from managers, like, I'm not their therapist. I'm like, no, you shouldn't be. Good.
No. Yeah.
Thank you for recognizing that. That is actually very effective
Mhm.
for you to know that. But asking about it and caring about it doesn't mean you have to fix it.
Right. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
yeah, no, I love all of that.
Yeah. And I think,
Um,
even just recognizing, and I think the culture around this is changing, but recognizing that a birth, even if everything goes well, like, is still a pretty, like, physically traumatic thing, but also it's a big deal. I think, like, setting that expectation for a workplace or for an employer, instead of just a, like, well, that's something you do on your own time and then you come back to work
right.
6 weeks later and you're good, right? Like that, like recognizing this is there's a lot of trauma that, but also, and a lot of feelings, but also I think, how we've gotten better at supporting someone in the workplace if are grieving a loss or recovering from a physical illness. All that applies here as well, right?
Mm,
Like
mm,
that, all of that comes in. So it's not just a, like, hey, you're good, right? Like, come back to work. It's a, like, what do you need? How are you doing? What are some of the things that are changing for you? How can we support you at work? And not just expecting that a birth is a non-issue, and sort of redefining it and saying, well, we've gotten really good at being supportive of other types of events, life events that people experience while they're working, but this is one where it's okay to bring in some of those same skills and tools to sort of say, like, yeah, things are going to need to be different, because another thing that a new parent struggles with is feeling like they're not going to be as good at their jobs, and feeling like everybody sees that
mm,
like
mm,
their
mm.
boss is certainly going to pick up on the fact that their attention isn't fully there, and that they might not be able to be as productive as they were before having a child, and that makes them worse at their job, when in fact it doesn't. It just means you have a more understanding of the complexity of the world, and probably that makes you
Mm,
better at your job in a lot of ways.
mm,
But so if
yes,
if a
I
supervisor or
love
boss
all that.
can if a supervisor can say that, can say, like, I recognize this is going to change things for you at work. So, like, what do you need? Do you need time to pump, and how can we find ways for you to do that? What, is the meeting schedule going to need to change? Like, be proactive about that, and don't wait for the birthing person to, or the partner to tell you that, oh, I can't make that meeting, or I'm going to need to change my schedule. Like, let's assume that some of that's going to need to change.
Mm, mm. I feel like when I think about my work experience pre-owning my own company,
Mm.
there not that it was uh well, I mean, a couple of patterns, right? That typically the other people in the office who had experience being the birthing parent
Mhm.
had a lot more empathy and understanding perhaps
Mhm.
than like sometimes people who were partners. And and a lot of times people are just so eager for the person to get back because, there's been a
Mhm.
burden on the workplace potentially.
Yeah.
And again, because I think, well, everyone, like people have kids, this is what happens. It's very transactional. And
Mhm.
even though it's so common, that doesn't take away from the exhaustion, the trauma, the needs of the individual person. And so I appreciate that practice. And also, I mean, this is a really good way of thinking about being a more inclusive leader,
Mhm.
is to be proactive, to not wait, um, and to anticipate some of that. I mean, and
Mhm.
that to me is would show a sign of safety,
Mhm.
of right thoughtfulness. It would certainly likely deepen trust
Yeah.
because people would feel like that their manager was being empathetic towards them and cared for them and was
Mhm.
thinking about them. I also I mean, I had a reaction when you said it, but that idea of, it expands people's perspectives and it expands their
Mhm.
understanding of the complexity of humans. I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like this is everything we're about, is how do we help people understand the complexity of humans, that we don't fit in this 4 box
Yeah.
model of I'm a cat and you're a dog and here's what you need to know. Like
Right.
that's not what we're into. And yeah, because I don't know, there's a lot that's coming up for me, and it's so simple what you're saying is, it's not just the policies, but it's being proactive about, being flexible,
Mhm.
where you can, thinking about them when they come back. And I know, when working with, people who maybe did come back, I mean, one of the things I was super aware of is there was a lot of loss for them,
Mhm.
especially in American culture. We don't have good maternity or paternity leave. We
Mhm.
don't, if you're fortunate enough to work for a company, great, but the vast majority of people don't. So they're having to come back way quicker. And that brings up some stuff too, right?
Mhm.
Um, but
Mhm.
there's often so much loss and just like, "Oh, I'm going to miss out and I miss
Mhm.
them and all of this."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, in the US, we usually I mean, the typical leave is about 6 weeks unpaid. 6 weeks is also when you're estimated to be physically recovered from the birth, right? Like, so that and just barely. And in my experience, well, and if anything went wrong or there was a C-section, a surgery, or anything like that, you're going back to work when you're not physically recovered. And
Yeah.
so I think to recognize, and you're also not sleeping, and you're probably not going to sleep well for a good amount of time that you're back at work. So just sort of adjusting self expectations, but also if that's reflected in the workplace, that it's okay that we all understand that something might need to change here, and that it's not even the birthing partner is going to feel like it's I'm not at my best and I
Mm.
don't know if I'm ever going to get back to my best, and that is what everybody's seeing. So they're really self conscious of, like, how am I showing my worth, even if I'm tired and not on top of my game and needing to take breaks and all of that. But yeah, if that can sort of be recognized, you're maybe not even ready to come back yet, but here you are. Right? Like, and so,
Right.
and the other part of it for so many, myself included, was I really wanted to go back to work, and I
Mm.
really like got a lot of meaning out of my identity as a working person. And so I there was a lot of excitement to go back to work, but also the other part of, like, now I'm leaving my child with somebody else, and childcare, and being away from them for the day, and all of that. So there's a lot of the dissonance happening in a person who even really identifies and loves their job, but that it's a hard shift to make. And it's a hard so if anything can be done to even ease that shift, I think also remote work has been a life changer for
Mm. Mm.
parents. But
Mhm.
both to be able to be home with their child and maybe ease the childcare burden, but also with worry about baby's health and exposure and things like that. So if there's any way to offer some flexibility in terms of someone returning to work after a birth, offer it, and make that available to somebody, because it really changes everything, and it changes how you think about your work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, is not only does it
Mhm.
serve the person and serve their relationships, but it serves the
Mhm.
relationship that they have with you. It's, I'm in our world, I think if we've often will be like, we're not curing cancer, folks. literally nothing we're doing is more important than taking care of your loved ones, taking care of
Yeah.
yourself, and so how do we prioritize this?
Mhm.
What, I wanna be really thoughtful of time
Mhm.
and, but I mean, I have, like, a whole list, but we're just gonna have to have you back another time.
Mhm.
What else would you wanna make sure that people are either thinking about in care of themselves or in care of other people related to this time of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think of the 3 S's for new parents, but probably for anyone. Self-care is one that we've talked about already, sort of
Mhm.
remembering that you're also important in your life to take care of. Um, and so other people encouraging that, reminding a new parent or birthing person to take care of themselves and bringing them the glass of water and, all of those things. Self-compassion is the other, and that gets to
Mm.
that feeling of not judging yourself for how difficult it is, and sort of recognizing that, yeah, everybody has a hard time and you're just one of those people, and and what's difficult for you, is there are other things that come more naturally to you, and all of it's okay. And that's also a practice and something that you might need to get better at if you've not done that work already. And then support is the other one, is sort of
Mm.
for the birthing people. I talk about working through some of the barriers you put up to accepting support and allowing for support and seeing that that's okay to need help and not to have to do everything by yourself. But for the people who are supports, to be thinking about that and maybe asking about that even beforehand. How can I be supportive? Some people want visitors after the baby's born, some people don't. Some people really need just another adult to talk to, and some people, just want a cup of coffee once a week, or like whatever that person's going to need. And what you can offer, is helpful, and to be sort of thinking about that and offering that proactively. And most new parents that I work with who even have trouble accepting support are going to know that they're going to reach a point when they can't not take the help and the support. So if there are people lined up and people who have offered, those that stays in your mind, and that really means something, I think. So
Yeah. No, it's something I've been trying to work on trying to offer specific things and ask, would that be helpful? Like, would
mhm,
it be helpful if
yeah.
I brought over food, or would it be helpful if I just came and watched them? Or, I mean, or to your
Mhm,
point, a lot of my friends are like this. I just want to have an adult conversation.
yeah.
I
Mhm,
just want to sort of be reminded
mhm,
of this other part of myself that I feel is lost a bit.
yeah.
Like, I love this role and
Mhm,
I feel a little lost in it.
yeah.
Um, this is such good and such important information. And you pointed out a number of times that a lot of what we've talked about can apply to any
Mhm,
mental health situation. As we wrap up our time, there's always a question I ask, so I'd love to hear from you. Since this whole show is about just how do we change the conversations with ourselves and with other
mhm.
people. What is a conversation you've had with yourself or with someone else that transformed you?
Oh man. Oh man, there's so many. It's hard to just think about one. But I think maybe because of the pandemic, a conversation I had with myself, maybe not early enough on. I wish I had had it with myself earlier, but a little bit later on, when I recognized, like, I can't do all this. I can't
Mm,
be a full time parent, be caring for my children all day, be working, being a therapist and responsible for a lot of other people's emotional health and holding it all. And I wasn't feeling like I was certainly probably telling myself I wasn't doing a good job in any of those roles. So I had to sort of have this conversation about, like, it's okay. Like, make the goals smaller and make the measures of success much smaller. Like, did we get outside today? Are the kids still alive at
mm,
bedtime? Did
yeah.
I do the one important work meeting that I needed to get to, right? Like, bringing the expectations way down.
Mm,
And we
mm,
probably all have needed to do that during the pandemic. But I think for me, I had to do it consciously. I had to say, like, you are in a global pandemic. No one has needed to parent through this before. Like, you're going to figure out your own way to do it. And it's okay if it's different from everybody else. And we didn't have time to talk about social media, but that's such a toxic place for new parents,
mm,
that they see everybody else is doing it so much better than them, and all the curated images of Kids,
Oh,
happy kids
right.
and happy
Yeah,
moms
just
and
that,
clean
like,
houses.
Pinterest, like, the Pinterest, birthday parties. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
"Are they loved?"
Yeah,
Like
it's a hard place, and I think that has
right.
exacerbated during the pandemic because you weren't seeing a lot of real world other houses, other households, other experiences. You were seeing those kind of curated images of how everybody else was doing, and so yeah, just that feeling of like it's okay to just do less in all of
Mm,
your roles and be okay with that.
mm, mm. I I think we all could use that from time to
Yes.
time of just, how do we just bring expectations way down and
Yeah.
be okay that this is where we are.
Yeah.
This has been such a treat on multiple levels, my dear old friend, and you brought so much insight and wisdom for people who want to connect with you or who are interested in checking out your books. Where is the best place for them to
Mm.
connect with you, and
Sure. Yeah.
to get your resources?
Well, the book is available anywhere you buy books. It's called Brave New Mom. And there's also a website associated with that, which is bravenewmom.org. And then my professional website is empowermentalhealth.org. And that's got kind of more information about all the different roles and different things that I've done.
Beautiful. And we'll share those
Yeah.
in the show notes. And for people who are listening, who are interested, one of the things we've started is book giveaways. So if you are listening to this and you're interested in a copy of either your book, Brave New Mom, or you have the workbook on loneliness, which I think
Mhm.
is really it, timely in a time of just what feels like constant isolation. Even when you're around people, there feels like there's barriers here that weren't here before. Send us
Mhm.
an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, and the first few people who reach out to us will get a copy of those books. Miss, I'm not Miss, Doctor, because I'm
Thank
all
you.
about honoring the work.
Mhm.
Jessie Everts, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you for everything you bring to the world and being willing to share it with all of us
Yeah.
today. So
Thank you so
thank
much for
you.
having me. It was wonderful.
Our guest this week has been Dr. Jessie Everts, and it was on multiple levels, such a treat for me personally to reconnect with her after all of these years, but also personally, there's a lot that I'm leaving with. The one that I'm thinking about and chewing on is that idea when she said, and when people are struggling, they're looking for cues that they can give you the real answer. And I'm just continuing to reflect on that to think of how else can I make sure I show up in a way that people feel safe to give me the real answers. So, just a huge thank you to Dr. Jessie Everts, and also a big thank you to everyone else who submitted questions to help guide and shape this conversations. Nick and I, we were talking that we just scratched the surface, so we will definitely look to have her back. And so we want to hear from you. We want to hear what resonated for you, what came up for you during this conversation. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can always send us an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com. You also can send me a DM. They're always open on all social media platforms. And if you'd like to learn more about the work that we do, you can check us out at sarahnollwilson.com. And you can also pick up a copy of my latest book, Don't Feed the Elephants, wherever books are sold. And if you've been with us a while, or if you've just joined us and are appreciating the conversations that we're having and the work we're trying to do, please consider supporting us. You can do this through a variety of ways. First is you can become a patron, which supports the show financially. And you can go to patreon.com/conversations on conversations. Also, please rate and review and subscribe to the show. The more reviews we get, the higher the ratings, the more we can bring on excellent guests like Dr. Jessie Everts. And I just want to give a huge thanks to our incredible team who makes this podcast possible. To our producer, Nick Wilson, our sound editor, Drew Knoll, our transcriptionist, Olivia Reinert, our marketing consultant, Caitlin Summit Nelson, and the rest of the Snowco crew. And just a wholehearted final thank you to our guest, Dr. Jessie Everts, as we explore this very important topic of parenting and mental health. This has been Conversations on Conversations. Thank you so much for listening, for giving us your time and your energy. And remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. Thank you all so much. Please make sure you rest, make sure you rehydrate, and we will see you next week.